Доброго дня, любі колеги, любі студенти. Сьогодні ми зібралися в цій віртуальній аудиторії Київського столичного університету імені Бориса Грінченка на зустріч, на лекцію із другом нашої кафедри, із професором Девідом Лівінгстоном з нагоди Міжнародного дня науки.
Good afternoon, our students and our professors, our colleagues. We are gathered today in this virtual classroom of Boris Grinchenko Kyiv Metropolitan University to watch and listen to the lecture of our friend, Professor Девід Лівінгстон from the Department of World Literature.
Девід Лівінгстон професор кафедри англійських та американських студій Факультету мистецтва Університету Палацького Чеської Республіки. Він викладає курси британської літератури, він є шекспірознавець знаний і залюблений в американську народну музику.
David Livingstone is an assistant professor in the Department of English and American Studies at the Faculty of Arts, Palacký University, Czech Republic. He teaches courses in British literature, Shakespeare, and American folk music.
Перше ми познайомилися з професором Девідом Лівінгстоном під час шекспірівських днів в Україні 2025, організованих докторкою філології, докторкою філологічних наук, директоркою Українського шекспірівського центру, професоркою Наталією Торкут. 4 квітня 2025 року Девід Лівінгстон читав лекцію на тему «Шекспірові життєписи. Адаптації біографії Барда в сучасній англомовній літературі».
We first met Professor Livingstone during Shakespeare Days in Ukraine in 2025, organized by Professor Natalia Torkut, director of the Ukrainian Shakespeare Center. On April 4th, 2025, he delivered a lecture titled Shakespeare's Lives, Adaptation of the Bard in Contemporary English Language Literature.
На цьому слайді ви бачите кілька скрінів з блискучої лекції пана професора.
Here you can see several screenshots from Professor Livingstone's brilliant lecture.
Вдруге, ми слухали професора наживо. Уже за місяць, 6 травня 2025 року, з нагоди Міжнародного дня Європи і Днів Шекспіра в Україні 2025, у стінах нашого університету вже наживо, ми слухали харизматичного Девіда Лівінгстона, і пан професор прочитав блискучу лекцію адаптації п'єс і життєпису Шекспіра в сучасній англомовній літературі та кіно.
We also had pleasure of meeting Professor Livingstone again in person on May 6 in 2025 on the occasion of the International Day of Europe and Shakespeare Days in Ukraine. At our university, the charismatic scholar delivered another outstanding lecture, Adaptations of Shakespeare's plays and life in contemporary English language literature and film.
Відеозапис лекції можна переглянути на YouTube-каналі кафедри світової літератури Факультету української, філології, культури і мистецтва нашого університету Бориса Грінченка. Покликання на відеозапис лекції ви бачите на слайді.
You can watch the video recording of this lecture on YouTube channel of the Department of World Literature, Faculty of Ukrainian Philology, Culture and Arts, and you can see the link to our YouTube channel on this slide.
І от сьогодні, з нагоди Міжнародного дня науки, американський професор, який тривалий час мешкає і працює в Чехії, прочитає лекцію «Пророче бачення» Джорджа Орвелла. Тривалість лекції приблизно 40 хвилин. Після лекції плануємо півгодинне обговорення. Просимо аудиторію до активної взаємодії з лектором, ставити питання, можна ставити їх наживо, можна ставити в чаті, ділитися своєю рефлексією щодо почутого.
And today, to celebrate the International Day of Science, our guest, an American professor who has been living and working in the Czech Republic for many years, will deliver a new lecture titled The Prophetic Vision of George Orwell. The lecture will last about 40 minutes and will be followed by a 30-minute discussion. We encourage everyone to take an active part. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or speak up during the discussion. And don't forget to share your reflections.
Дякую, пані Галино. Пане професоре Девіде Лівінгстоне, будь ласка, вам слово.
Yeah, Professor David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we see and
Okay,
hear
thank you
you.
so much for the lovely introduction. I wanted to show you, I still have the t-shirt. I haven't taken it off. I haven't washed it. No, just a joke. But I wore the shirt especially today because I'm with you. I just had a meeting actually with the Ukrainian ambassador to Czechia, Mr. Vasil Zvaric. And we were discussing cooperation and how to support not only Ukrainian students here in Czechia, but also Ukrainian universities back home. So it's my honor to spend some time with you again. I wish I could be with you in person, but I hope in the near future, maybe I will come again in the spring, perhaps with my friend, Professor Brian Reynolds, who came with me last time, or by myself, or maybe with another person. We will see. So I don't know right now. Anyway, today I'm not going to talk about Shakespeare, but about another great writer, Mr. George Orwell, who I'm sure you're all familiar with to some degree. I just wrote an article actually about with a Ukrainian colleague from Ivano-Frankivsk about George Orwell's reception in Ukraine. And we hope to publish it soon. So if anyone is interested, I can send you a copy when it's published. If you have any questions, of course, you can ask in person or you can write me in the chat. So here goes. George Orwell is one of those writers who has given us an adjective. If you say something is Orwellian, of course, kind of like another writer who gives us an adjective is Franz Kafka, the Czech German Jewish writer. So if something is Kafkaesque, it's something absurd. If something is Orwellian, it implies that something is kind of creepy, something is scary, something is threatening, okay? And this, of course, is connected with one of George Orwell's most famous slogans, Big Brother is watching you, okay? And unfortunately, we still live in a very Orwellian world, and it seems to be getting worse. So the title of my talk is The Prophetic Vision of George Orwell, in that George Orwell was not only very relevant to the time, but he's still relevant to today in the 21st century. So you may or may not know that George Orwell is actually the pen name of Erік Артур Блер. So to his friends and his two wives, his first wife died and he remarried near the end of his life. He was Erік Артур Блер, no relation to Tony Blair, the former prime minister. As you can see, Orwell didn't live a long time. Maybe it seems like a long time to you students, but not to me. He died at the age of 47. And interestingly, he was born in India, and this was the time of the British colonies, when the British said that the sun never sets on the British Empire. But he left India as a toddler, I think at the age of 1, and his family moved back to England. So he was a British citizen. But his family had a long colonial history. Some of his family, his grandparents were involved in the colonies in Jamaica and elsewhere. And I think, this experience of colonialism which again is very relevant to Ukraine. Ukraine now is trying to come to terms, of course, with attempts by Russia to deny its identity and swallow it up. So now we talk about post-colonialism. So I think Orwell was one of those writers who began to question the moral justification for colonization. In Orwell's case, of course, in Asia. Orwell went to school at the most prestigious secondary school in England, Eton. If you've seen your Harry Potter, it kind of looks like the Harry Potter school. And you would think this would be a positive experience, but Orwell hated his school. Well, he didn't hate everything about it. He liked the subjects, but he didn't like the atmosphere. English public schools, which actually means private, that's kind of an Orwellian reality, were renowned for bullying, for hazing. This means when you kind of torture younger students. And it was a boys' school, so kind of this too much macho behavior. So this is still kind of a stereotype of English public schools. So be glad you go to a school that is mixed with men and women. He actually wrote an essay about this, and Orwell is not only a famous novelist, but a great essay writer. And I know that some of his essays have been translated into Ukrainian. And he wrote this essay, kind of autobiographical essay called Such Were the Joys, which comes from Wordsworth, actually. But Orwell meant it ironically. He hated his school. And I think this is the beginning of Orwell's social conscience, that he began to be aware that that the class system in Great Britain, and especially in England, cultivated cruelty, cultivated bullying of weaker people. And this stayed with him throughout his life. When he graduated from secondary school, unlike most of his colleagues who went on to go to Oxford and Cambridge and other prestigious universities, he decided not to take that path because he wanted to do something different. He wanted some adventure, but he also wanted to see the world. And he ended up in Burma. Burma, of course, is in Southeast Asia. It's now called Myanmar. And I have a student here from Myanmar who's had to flee the country because of the war there. So unfortunately, there are more wars around the world, which we should be aware of. And he went there with kind of high ambitions, thinking that he was going to be doing something good. He really believed in the colonial vision. Maybe if you know your Rudyard Kipling, who was a bit older generation, he was kind of the poster boy of colonialism. And he popularized the phrase, the white man's burden, the white man's burden. In other words, that Europeans were supposed to go to Africa, to Asia, to Latin America, and bring civilization and bring democracy and all this talk. But Orwell quickly realized that he was on the wrong side of morality, that the English were actually an invading force who were not there with the permission of the Burmese, who were trying to exploit the country economically and in terms of natural resources. So he became quickly disillusioned by this job, and he wrote several essays about this. One is called The Hanging, where he has to participate in executing a Burmese man, but he feels this incredible guilt because he knows that this man is being executed for breaking a law, which of course is imposed by the English, okay? So often criminals in a totalitarian state can often be the heroes. He wrote another essay called Shooting an Elephant, which is really about the destruction of Burmese culture. So he was stuck between a rock and a hard place because he had this job which he despised, which he hated, which he felt guilty about. He actually sympathized with the Burmese, and he even got involved with Burmese women. So he tried to get close to the culture. After this, in 1934, he even published a novel about this, which has been published in Ukrainian as well, called Burmese Days, which is loosely autobiographical and where the main protagonist ends up committing suicide. And this would have been his fate if he ended up staying in Burma, because it was a no-win situation. So this was also a very unpleasant experience for him. And in 1927, so still only 24, he came back to Europe, and he decided that he wanted to go to another extreme. So he decided to experiment with being a homeless person. This is quite intense, isn't it? And so he became homeless on purpose and started to wander the English countryside, living in homeless shelters. And you can imagine that 100 years ago, these homeless shelters are not very advanced. So he really wanted to get on the side of what he called the underdog, okay, the weak, the working class people. And he wrote a book about this called Down and Out in Paris and London. This is nonfiction, based upon his own experience, not only being a homeless person in England, but kind of doing various kinds of menial, hard labor jobs in France. And this is a quote from the book. Quote, "I was conscious of an immense weight of guilt that I'd got to expiate. I felt I'd got to escape, not merely from imperialism, but from every form of man's dominion over man. I wanted to submerge myself, to get right down among the oppressed, to be one of them and on their side against tyranny." So this was a real turning point also in his life, where he wanted to, he felt guilty about having been part of the British colonial police, and so he wanted to experience the other side of reality. So from the beginning, Orwell was always concerned, I would say, with the common man and woman, and very suspicious of people in power, not only from the left, the extreme left of communism, Soviet communism, but also on the right in his own country. As I mentioned already, Orwell married, but his wife, they never had children, and his wife died while he was still alive. This is one of my favorite books of his, which kind of is about marriage life. So this is one of his funnier books. It's a novel, made into an excellent film adaptation starring Helena Bonham Carter. You might know her from the Harry Potter films, and the wonderful Richard E. Grant as the main character. I won't go into too much detail about that because it's not really about politics, this one, but just to show that Orwell wasn't just a one-trick pony. He wrote a range of books on different themes. These are some of his also important books. Orwell, like many Western intellectuals, decided to join and fight in Spain in the 1930s during the Spanish Civil War. Hopefully you know that the Spanish Civil War was fought between the left, which consisted of various factions, socialists, communists, and anarchists, fighting against the fascist right led by General Franco, who had aligned himself with the Catholic Church. Franco, of course, won, and Spain for the next 30 years was really a dictatorship. So many intellectuals, including Hemingway and others, decided they wanted to fight against fascism because they saw this as a precursor to World War II. Of course, the rise of Mussolini in Italy and of course, Mr. Hitler in Germany and Austria. So Orwell was fighting on the left, but he soon became disillusioned. And Catalonia, of course, was one of the centers of the left. This is the region of Spain, which has its own language and for many years wanted independence. But we won't get into that either. But he quickly became disillusioned because he realized that the communists who he was fighting alongside of weren't really concerned with beating the fascists, but they were more concerned with keeping power for themselves. So they were sabotaging the work of their colleagues. So he began to be very suspicious of Soviet communism and that how it wasn't democratic, it was totalitarian. And this was a time when most Western intellectuals in Britain, in Western Europe and USA were very naive about communism. For example, George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish English playwright, went to Moscow. When people told him about the Holodomor in Ukraine, he refused to believe it. Okay, many other intellectuals did the same. There's a wonderful recent film by the Polish director Agnieszka Holland called Mr. Jones, about a Welsh journalist who was one of the first Westerners to go to the Soviet Union. And he actually went to Ukraine and saw firsthand the Holodomor. and came back to England and wrote about it. But this was very controversial because people didn't want, the British were still allies with the Soviet Union, and they didn't want to admit the ugly side of Soviet communism, and especially its treatment of Ukraine, not only Ukraine, but also places like Kazakhstan, which also experienced famine, right? So Orwell was so anyway, that's an interesting film, Mr. Jones. And in the film, Orwell appears, which I don't think is accurate, but nevertheless, he advises Mr. Jones to have the courage to publish about the truth about the Ukrainian Holodomor. So Orwell was, back to the book, Orwell was shot through the neck. Fortunately, it didn't kill him. And he went back home to England. But he realized that something is rotten. To quote Shakespeare, Shakespeare says something is rotten in the state of Denmark in Hamlet. But something was rotten about Soviet communism. And this is the beginning, I would say, of him being one of the few intellectuals in the West to really critique Soviet communism, despite the fact that this was not very popular at the time. I put up here two other books of his. One of them, The Road to Wigan Pier, was a nonfiction book where he actually went to Northern England and witnessed firsthand the living conditions of miners, working class miners in England. At the time, this was also something people wanted to ignore, kind of the own poverty, even within Britain. So he wrote a book about this. And Coming Up for Air is a novel kind of about a midlife crisis, a man who decides to kind of run away from his family, only to realize you can't run away from yourself. Now, I'd like to move on to Orwell's two most famous books, Animal Farm, 1945, so published right at the end of World War II. And of course, this is an allegory. You students all know what allegories are. An allegory is a story where it represents something else. Okay, there's many famous allegories in world literature. So it's an allegory of the Soviet revolution. And in the book, of course, the farmer who runs the farm represents the Russian aristocracy, the Tsar, okay, who's thrown out by the Bolsheviks. And the animals represent me and you, the average people. Okay, and of course, after the revolution, the farmer flees, and all the animals have a congress, and they come up with some new rules. And the most important tenet of the new society, of course, is all animals are equal. Sound familiar? And of course, communism sounds good on paper, right? Everyone's going to be equal and live in love and harmony. But as we know, not only in your country, but in my adopted country, in Czechia, Czechia wasn't part of the Soviet Union, but it was part of the Soviet bloc. And one reason why Czechs, we have Ukrainian flags in front of our building, that Czechs are still very sympathetic to Ukraine, is because in 1968, Czechoslovakia, it was two countries then, one country then, was invaded by the Soviet Union, by Brezhnev. So there's been this, and there was another 21 years of hardcore communism after that. So this allegory is about how communism develops, and at first the animals seem to be very happy, but soon the pigs take power. One of the pigs represents Karl Marx, he's the theorist. One of the pigs represents Vladimir Lenin. One of them represents Joseph Stalin, of course, the worst one. And soon the animals begin to say, hey, what's going on? Because the pigs also train the dogs to be aggressive. So the dogs represent, the pigs represent the Communist Party, and the dogs represent the secret police used to keep people under control. There's a horse in the story who is very hardworking, but rather stupid. So he represents the kind of naive proletariat who keeps believing in the promises of the government. There's a crow, a bird, and he, of course, is able to fly and check out what it's like elsewhere. So he's like a dissident, someone who's able to kind of critique the system because he knows more than others. Anyway, to make a long story short, at the end of the book, the animals are getting fed up with the way they're being mistreated by the pigs. And the pigs, they have various rules. All animals are equal. 2 legs, bad. 4 legs, good. Okay, so having 2 legs, walking on 2 legs is considered an evil human capitalist belief. Animals don't sleep in beds. Animals don't drink in alcohol. Animals don't wear clothes. These are all supposed to be the evil behavior of humans. But one day they look into the farmhouse and they see that the pigs are negotiating with some of the local farmers, and they're all wearing clothes and they're all drinking alcohol and they're all lying about in beds. In other words, as maybe you students don't remember this, but your parents do and your grandparents do, often, of course, as they see the slogan, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. In other words, if you're part of the Communist Party, okay, you have privileges. You could get Coca-Cola, you could get Marlboros, you could get Jack Daniels, okay? You could travel. If you weren't part of the Communist Party, of course, you often had suffered. And this is the quote from the book. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. So in other words, the pigs and the humans blend into each other. And I think this book not only prophesizes about communism, but it prophesizes about the end of communism. And as you know, often the people who were hardcore communists became capitalists overnight. They just changed their little badge, okay? Because often these were the people who knew how to manipulate people, who had access to money, who had access to power. So he quite prophetically recognizes that human nature is not to share, is not to be equal, but people will always try to exploit each other. So it's a very powerful book, and like many great books, it can be read on several levels. You can read it just as a kind of animal story, but of course, if you know more about the history, it's very much relevant and still relevant to today. You might not know this, but there was actually a Ukrainian translation of Animal Farm all the way back in 1947, which was translated apparently by this gentleman. He used a pen name, maybe because this was something dangerous at the time. And it wasn't, as far as I understand, this was researched by my colleague from Frankivsk. It wasn't published in the Soviet Union, but was published abroad and was distributed amongst Ukrainians in refugee camps. And Orwell was asked to write a special preface to the book, which was translated into Ukrainian. The original manuscript has been lost, but apparently the Ukrainian translation exists, which was used in the book, and this is a back translation of the Ukrainian. And in this preface, Orwell explains why he wanted to write about Animal Farm and about Soviet communism. He says, quote, "To experience all this," he means like the Spanish Civil War, colonialism, being homeless, "to experience all this was a valuable object lesson. It taught me how easily totalitarian propaganda can control the opinion of enlightened people in democratic countries." So this is written almost 70 years ago or 80 years ago, but it's more relevant than ever. Of course, you are all aware, unfortunately, I'm so ashamed of my own country, USA, and our idiotic president. I don't even like to acknowledge he's a president, Mr. Trump, or I call him Voldemort. But the way people are so easily manipulated, often by Russian propaganda, to believe lies. So Orwellian newspeak or doublethink, which I'm going to talk about in a second, is still alive and well, unfortunately. And the second quote here, he says, quote, "It was of the utmost importance to me that people in Western Europe should see the Soviet regime for what it really was." So Orwell really was pioneering and prophetic in trying to point out the whole elaborate lie of the Soviet Union that communism was really benefiting everybody, when actually it was benefiting only a certain amount of people. Now, 1984 is Orwell's most famous book, and some people wonder why 1984. And Orwell said, well, there was no mystery to it. He wrote it in 1948, right after the war, and he just switched the last two numbers. And I mentioned already Orwell's famous slogan, "Big Brother is watching you." I don't know if you have in Ukraine, but in Czechia and in UK and USA, a number of years ago, reality shows began to be popular. And one of them was called Big Brother. And this involved people who would live in a house, and usually quite stupid people who like to be exhibitionists. And they would get drunk and have love affairs. Well, not, love affairs is too strong a word. Have sex with each other. And people would watch their behavior like they were in a zoo. And then usually they would vote out one person who was especially disgusting. And the winner was kind of the least horrible out of all of them. Now, if George Orwell knew that his warning, "Big Brother is watching you," was now being embraced and celebrated as something fun and cool, he would roll over in his grave. You know this phrase? If you roll over in your grave, you know, you're like, oh my goodness, how did this happen? So this is ironic that something that's a warning that you don't want to be observed and watched. Now people are willingly being watched and enjoying being a guinea pig. These are some of his other slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. These are examples of the ideology presented in the book. There's a quite good film version of this, which you can check out by yourself, appropriately released in 1984 and directed by Mr. Michael Radford, and starring John Hurt as Winston Smith, the main protagonist, and the great Welsh actor Richard Burton as Mr. O'Brien, the evil guy in the book. I forgot to show you, this is my copy of the book. You can see it looks very old. It's from my high school days when I was a teenager, and it's so old I had to rewrite the book's title on it. And it has all my notes. So this is what a book should look like, young people, like you really used it. Okay, it doesn't have to be this ugly, but just to show that that I like to keep books I've had since I was young, just as a memory. Anyway, this is an example of a so-called dystopia. And the word dystopia, of course, is a variation of the word utopia, which was invented or coined by the Renaissance philosopher Thomas More in the book from 1516, written in Latin, actually. And Thomas More imagined an ideal society where people would be wise and loving and live in peace. Of course, this has not happened, has it? So instead of utopias, unfortunately, there are many more examples of dystopias. And I just listed a number of examples of this. I think one of my favorites is by the great Aldous Huxley from 1932, Brave New World, which is a citation actually from Shakespeare's The Tempest, which imagines a future where everyone is on drugs and kind of sedated, so they have no energy to protest about anything. So sometimes this is more relevant to us. Sometimes I think my students are on drugs, not literal drugs, but the drug of their telephone. They can't get away, you know, they can't look over. I think a lot of my students, if they didn't look at their phone in 5 minutes, they would probably have an overdose and go crazy. So kids, take a break from your phone sometimes. Exercise, socialize, make love. So this is, and in this book, actually, the main protagonist, he escapes this drugged world and goes out into the real world where he has to work much harder to survive, but has a more meaningful life. And this is often a trope in dystopias, that often it's better to be living in the outdoors in nature, even if it's difficult, but at least you can actually live and interact with real people. Orwell's book has also influenced many later works. I was just watching with my wife 2 nights ago this Woody Allen film classic called Sleeper, which is where the main protagonist, played by Woody Allen, of course, is frozen in time, and he wakes up in the 22nd century, where everyone realizes, for example, that smoking is good for you, eating pork is good for you. It sounds good. I like living in Ukraine because I always got served salo and horalka, all these good things, healthy things. This is my attempt at a joke. So I like unhealthy food, so Ukraine is good for that. Anyway, so this is the future where people have, one of my favorite parts of this is that people don't have sexual intercourse anymore. Instead, they go into, they're born from test tubes, and they go into a so-called orgasmatron, which is like a telephone booth instead of sex. So unfortunately, this is also being quite true, right? We have a whole generation perhaps addicted to porno online instead of actually interacting with real people. Tak. These are the main characters in the book. Big Brother is there's 3 superpowers in Orwell's book: Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. So the book takes place in Oceania, in London, which has become part of one country with North America. Okay. Eurasia would be the rest of Europe, including Ukraine, and East Asia would be China, Japan, and parts of Southeast Asia. So quite similar, unfortunately, to reality now. And Oceania is always at war. But one day it's at war with Eurasia, the next day with East Asia, and nobody seems to know why. Okay. Enemy number 1 in Oceania is Mr. Emanuel Goldstein. Notice he has a kind of Jewish name. I think this is also kind of prophetic of people using Jews as scapegoats, as boogeyman's to blame things on. But it's never very clear if Emanuel Goldstein even exists. He's used as kind of the big bad wolf, someone who's behind all the evil in the world. And in order to whip people up into paranoia and anger. The main character, Winston Smith, is a middle-aged man who works in the Ministry of Truth, but he's actually responsible for lying. Okay, this is the paradox. His job is he gets old newspaper headlines and he changes them to reflect the current political dogma. So if the as you know, under Soviet Union, there was always like a 10-year program, 10-year promise. So we will be on the same level as Germany in 10 years. And then 10 years later, they say, well, 10 years more. Okay. And of course, people are like, wait, didn't he say what happened? Winston Smith is this average Joe, and he lives in a flat. Let's look at the beginning of the book. This is the first paragraph. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph. It's a great beginning. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. I like this opening because there's something ominous about it. You know the word ominous, spooky, Orwellian. Clocks are only supposed to go up to 12. And of course, 13 is the unlucky number. So right away, it gives us an impression that something has changed in the world. Something has gone wrong. Winston Smith, so he has this kind of everyman name. Smith is the most common last name in English. His chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. So it describes the bad weather, the ugliness, the foulness, and you get the irony that he lives in a block of flats, kind of like a socialist era block of flats, but it's called Victory Mansions. So this is an oxymoron because there's nothing like a mansion is supposed to be a beautiful, noble house, right? And victory, of course, this is a reference to the way the communists would often have these slogans about victory over imperialism, victory over USA, okay? How people were forced to go to parades and wave their pom-pom even if there wasn't enough toilet paper. okay, but you had to pretend everything was fine. So right away, he evokes this kind of ominous, futuristic, horrible place. But unlike Huxley's book, where everyone lives in prosperity, here everyone lives in kind of socialist era poverty. Okay, he goes into the flat, and there's a poster of Big Brother, who obviously is supposed to resemble Mr. Joseph Stalin, okay, with a big mustache, kind of good-looking guy, dark hair. And the lift isn't working. Maybe you can relate, okay? And look at the last sentence, last two sentences. So he goes up the stairs. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. So it's a wonderful beginning, not wonderful pleasant, but wonderfully creepy. He really evoked this horrible atmosphere of living under surveillance. All the flats in this society have TVs with only one channel. Okay, Orwell wasn't right about this. Now we have lots of channels, mostly with just nonsense on them. But the TV not only allows you to watch a program, but it watches you. So everyone's lost their privacy. Okay, so everyone's under control. Fortunately or unfortunately for Winston, his flat is designed poorly, or fortunately for him, because he has a little corner where he can get away from the camera, okay? And this enables him to sit and write notes. And he starts writing in his notebook without realizing it, subconsciously, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother. So he becomes kind of a revolutionary, a dissident against the system. I'm going to skip that. In the story, he meets Julia, who is a younger woman who seems to be a model member of the regime. Okay, it's called Ingsoc. I forgot to put it here. That's kind of it comes from England society. Ingsoc. This is their government. But Julia slips him a note that she actually has a crush on him, and they end up having a passionate love affair. And this is one of the positives of the book. Winston Smith was married before, but his wife has left him, so he's single and lonely. So he finally meets someone who cares about him. But unlike Winston Smith, who's very angry and skeptical, Julia's like someone who just kind of goes with the flow. She knows that the Ingsoc, the communist ideology, is nonsense, but she's found a way to kind of live with it, to rebel in small ways. They eventually meet a man, O'Brien, who seems to be an undercover dissident, and he gives them this Bible of Goldstein, which lays out the ideology of Ingsoc, but who eventually proves to be a double agent and has them arrested. And this is kind of one of the turning points of the book. I'm going to skip a bit. They're lying in bed. They found this kind of place this flat in the poor neighborhood where they think they have some privacy. And after making love, they're chatting together. And this is Julia speaking. She thought it over. They can't do that, she said finally. It's the one thing they can't do. They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it. They can't get inside you. So she holds fast to the belief that she cannot be broken, that they'll still preserve their love for each other. Unfortunately, this is not the case. You were the dead, theirs was the future. But if you could share in that future, if you could kept alive the mind as they kept alive the body and passed on the secret doctrine that 2 + 2 make 4. This is the motif that runs through the book. 2 + 2 make 4. I guess we all agree with this. But when, at the end of the book, when he's tortured, he has to kind of employ so-called doublethink. This is kind of to believe in a lie, and that 2 + 2 make 5. Okay, and back to the quote. "We are the dead," he said. "We are the dead," echoed Julia dutifully. "You are the dead," said an iron voice behind them. So all of a sudden they realize that they're being watched and they are arrested and taken to the Ministry of Peace, which is actually the Ministry of War. One of the funny things Trump does is he's changed the Ministry of Defense back to the Ministry of War. At least he's being honest for once. Just a couple more concepts. In the book, there's the concept of newspeak, which is the attempt by the regime to destroy language, to make it impossible to have rebellious thoughts, because language is going to be controlled so much and simplified. So instead of saying, for example, good, better, best, they're going to say good, good plus, good double plus. Okay, so kind of taking all the poetry and irregularity out of the language. There also is the concept of doublethink, which I already explained, where people are taught to believe lies. And of course, this is unfortunately still a problem nowadays. And if you do begin to question the propaganda that's thrown at you, you're accused of a so-called thought crime and can be arrested by the thought police. And there's lots of examples in the book which could be seen as parallels with both Ukrainian and Czech communism, my adopted country, surveillance cameras, airbrushed images, fake news, etc., etc. I just put this one example here. This is from a book by Milan Kundera, which is about the first communist president, Mr. Klement Gottwald. And you can see in the first picture, he's giving a speech with his colleagues. But then the second picture, his colleague who actually gave him the hat he was wearing has been airbrushed out of there because he was executed under the Stalinist excesses of the 1950s. So this is just an example of how this picture was circulated in Czechoslovakia and altered in order to make the man on the left with the other hat invisible. Now the story culminates when Winston and Julia are arrested and they're tortured and lots of things, but they don't break until finally they're taken to so-called Room 101. And Room 101 is a specially designed torture chamber where they design the special torture that's going to work for you. So I don't know what would be my special torture. Maybe spending time with my mother-in-law. This would kill me. Okay, I barely survived as it is. That was a joke. But Winston has a phobia of rats. Okay, partly stemming from his own experience when he abandoned his mother and his sister and found their dead bodies being eaten by rats. So they designed this, they put this cage on his face with these hungry rats they threaten to open the cage, and these rats are going to eat through his eyeballs and kill him. And this thought destroys him, okay? And he says, in the second quote, "Do it to Julia. Do it to Julia, not me. Julia, I don't care what you do to her. Tear her face off, strip her to the bones. Not me, Julia, not me." So this is when Winston is broken because he betrays the woman he loves, okay? And perhaps this is understandable. And the book concludes where Winston is released back into mainstream society, but he's a shell of a man, like a zombie. And he even meets Julia, and she looks the same. And she says to him, "I betrayed you," she said baldly. Baldly here means kind of honestly. "I betrayed you," he said. She gave him another quick look of dislike. So apparently they found something to also destroy Julia. So Julia's hope that they can't get inside you turns out to be wrong. The book concludes, the last paragraph, with Winston sitting in a pub drinking disgusting gin. And he's looking at the poster of Big Brother. He gazed up at the enormous face. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose, but it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. So he's defeated, and it has a very pessimistic ending, to say the least. Basically, that people can be destroyed not only physically, but mentally, spiritually. And I always wondered if this is really true. And I think it has been true in some cases, but at least I know in my adopted country, and certainly in Ukraine, people, even in the darkest times, have persevered, have maintained their beliefs despite awful torture. So perhaps this is too pessimistic an outlook. Orwell he was criticized for being too pessimistic, and he explained his justification in a letter to his editor, Mr. Francis Henson. Quote, the scene of the book, so this is not from the novel, but from a letter about the novel. The scene of the book is laid in Britain in order to emphasize that the English-speaking races are not innately better than anyone else, and that totalitarianism, if not fought against, could triumph anywhere. So again, he's prophetic in warning that totalitarianism, whether it's from the extreme left or the extreme right, can arise anywhere. And unfortunately, I think this is United States, which has always been a model of democracy, is under threat right now due to Trump and his followers. So he says, my recent novel, 1984, is not intended as an attack on socialism or on the British Labour Party, of which I am a supporter, but as a show-up of the perversions to which a centralized economy is liable and which have already been partly realized in communism and fascism. So he's warning of extremism on both sides. And he ends with this, and this is important, the moral to be drawn is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you. So he really meant this book to warn people that they need to be on guard. They need to be aware of how totalitarian states and totalitarian leaders are ready and willing to manipulate you, to destroy you, to brainwash you. So Orwell is alive and well, or at least his ideas, and more relevant than ever. This is from an essay he wrote about the English language, which I don't have time to look at. But that's kind of my main point about Orwell. I really believe that Ukraine can serve as a model of how to fight against this Orwellian newspeak. Of course, your country has survived so much suffering historically, so much propaganda, so much manipulation of history. I was just asked to be part of a new project on the Kievan Rus, the history of the nation, and how your country, of course, is so ancient compared to Moscow. And of course, this has been there have been attempts to deny Ukrainian history and Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian language. You know much better than me. So I think Orwell's message is still very relevant, not only to Ukraine, but elsewhere. So I wanted to leave some time for questions and maybe play one song to end it. But first, maybe respond to some questions, if there are some.
Девіде, щиро вдячні вам за цю дивовижну лекцію. Дуже цікаво, але найважливіше, що вона для нас надзвичайно актуальна. Для нас, українців, які, по суті, і живуть в час Орвелла, в орвелівський час, в цей абсурдний час. Я б хотіла, щоб ми зараз з вами продовжили нашу лекцію у форматі обговорення. Будь ласка, ставте ваші запитання. Було б чудово, якби ви це робили наживо, підносячи руки і озвучуючи це питання бажано англійською мовою. Ви можете ставити запитання в чаті також. Також готуйте свої рецепції, тому що пану професору дуже важливо почути наші думки, адже вони дуже надзвичайно важливі і надзвичайно цінні для нас. Дякую за ваші уже руки. Будь ласка, пані Галино, скажіть кілька слів, перекладіть пану Девіду.
Yeah, I understood. It's okay.
Yeah, we sincerely thank Professor David for this fascinating and very relevant lecture, especially for us Ukrainians. And as you have mentioned, we do live in Orwellian times. And now we would like to turn to the discussion, and we would prefer students not only texting their questions in the chat, but only raising their hands and asking them. And we already see 3 hands, so we will start answering.
Дякую, пані. Так, дякую, пані Галино. Будь ласка, пані Дарино, ви піднесли руку перша. Будь ласка.
Я так? Бо я з телефону я не
Так.
бачу.
Будь ласка, так.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the great lecture. I'm really interested myself in dystopian novels and with literature of this kind. I read Orwell's novel, started reading Guardian of Animals. I don't know how it is in English because I read it in Ukrainian.
Animal Farm, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, how do you think, what was the symbolism of implementing a love line into such a literary work? Because the relationships between Winston and Julia, they are kind of rude and they don't really correspond to what a propaganda says in the countries with such regime, because as we know, it seems, as my parents and grandparents told me, that in communistic countries and totalitarianistic countries, the propaganda about your love life is kind of saint. It's something higher, something I don't know, highbrow and above, and the relationship which are described in the novel, they are rude and kind of down to earth. So I would like to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think just to make the story bearable, there had to be some love interest and some romance. I didn't find it rude. Julia's member of the so-called anti-sex league, which is trying to destroy sexuality, which I don't think is really true of communism, because even under communism, you needed to reproduce, and people still fell in love. But I think the point was just that Julia was a kind of a breath of fresh air, because she saw through all the, excuse my French, bullshit, all the nonsense. She was just an honest person. She liked to have lovers. Why not? So she just rejected all of this propaganda and was kind of trying to enjoy life as much as she could. But then when she meets Winston, I think they really are kindred spirits and do love each other. So I don't find it rude at all. I think what's rude is the whole system which tries to manipulate people into thinking they can only marry for convenience. Okay, that they're destroying even the religious aspect. Religion is gotten rid of, and of course, religion has usually goes hand in hand with marriage, right? Celebrating marriage. But yeah, thank you for that comment.
Дякую, Девіде. Будь ласка, Вероніко. Вероніко, Перехрест, будь ласка, ваше запитання.
Зараз одну секунду. I wanted to say thank you for this lecture too. It was interesting to listen a little bit more about such a writer. And my question is, what makes Orwell's prophetic vision so powerful compared to other writers of his time?
I think because, as I tried to explain, I think because he really saw the world And he wasn't just an armchair philosopher. This means someone who just sits and comments on things but doesn't get his hands dirty. He really, saw firsthand suffering in Asia. He saw firsthand suffering in England, and he experienced war. So he was not just a theoretician, just this kind of intellectual snob, but someone who really went in the first line, and so his insight was gained through blood, through sweat, not through just theory. Okay, so he wasn't just this speculator about human nature, but actually knew it from the inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for answering.
You're welcome. Next.
Дякую. Будь ласка, Назарію. І я б хотіла, що хто пише в чат, будь ласка, озвучуйте ваші запитання. Будь ласка, Назарій.
So I would just to give feedback. Can I do this?
Sure.
Because I'm a person which absorb information and share it. So as I understand, Orwell was traveled in different countries. He saw the wars and he criticized the war. As I also understand all his works, it's like negative voiceover about totalitarian regime.
Totalitarianism. Yeah, it's difficult to pronounce. Yeah.
Excuse me, that I can have some problems with my pronunciation because
No problem.
such
No,
words.
I understand. Yes, you're right.
So that's all. Because I need to hurry up because I have a session within 10 minutes.
Okay. Next.
Yes. Goodbye. May God bless you.
Okay, thank you.
Дякую, Назарію. Будь ласка, Андрію Журба.
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you for your great, interesting lecture. It was really interesting to find out, again, that Orwell is someone who's not just a thinker, but also a person of action, whose ideas are based on his own personal experience. And one thing I noticed about Orwell is that during the first 2 years of full-scale invasion, his 1984 book was top shelf bestseller in Ukraine. In every bookstore, you could find it in the section of bestsellers. So it made me think, what is the situation with the popularity of his books in the West nowadays, especially with the drastic change in politics, in more radical state. So from your point of view, how popular are his main works now?
Good question. Thank you, Andre. Yeah, this is one of the paradoxes that often when people are suffering, when people are under threat, literature becomes important again. I think sometimes there's a tendency in this day and age when people are very prosperous in Western Europe and USA, they kind of lose interest in books. We just watch. Well, Orwell predicted this too, that there'd be just mindless entertainment, that songs would be produced on computers like AI. Okay, that there'd be no more interest in live music, live poetry. So, but I think Ukraine, with experiencing the full-scale invasion, makes people hungry again for knowledge, hungry for ideas to make sense of the world. So I think, and of course, as you know, Ukrainian literature and poetry is prospering maybe more than ever, because people are very keen to write about their lives. I have a number of anthologies of Ukrainian literature in translation, talking about the war, but also about all kinds of topics. So this is one positive, I think, of the full-scale invasion, is not only it's brought Ukraine together, but it's made Ukrainian language and literature more important than ever. So I think this is also the case. So the answer to your question is no, he's not read as much as he should be. And people in America should be reading him more, because we've got a big brother taking over in Mr. Trump. Thank you for the question.
Дякую. Маргарито, будь ласка.
Yes, first of all, I can say thank you for your lecture, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is, an Orwellian utopia possible where truth is valued more than power?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Is an Orwellian utopia possible where truth is valued more than power?
Well, he doesn't really describe a utopia. He just describes a dystopia. I think he would say probably it's our job as, and especially you as young people, that we'll never reach utopia. We always have to keep fighting. We always have to keep, we need education. We need critical thinking. This is why I hate AI. Don't use AI, kids. This is like an Orwellian trick this is like a drug to destroy your own way of thinking for yourself. So it's, you know, it's human nature to always perhaps sometimes take easy ways and believe demagogues and dictators. So we'll never reach utopia unless maybe we go to heaven, if that even exists. So I think it's our job as educators and you as students and maybe future educators and thinking people to always fight against totalitarianism and fight against people who try to manipulate and control people. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Дякую. Олено, будь ласка.
So first of all, I want to thank you for your lecture and your presentation. It was very interesting and informative. And my question is there anything you don't like about Orwell's works? Like, is there a least favorite book of his for you?
Yeah, some of them are like, he has a book called The Clergyman's Daughter, which is kind of boring. Yeah, I used to do a whole course with a colleague on Orwell, so I think there's his essays are especially worth reading. He talks about a lot of topics which are also relevant to today. So I mean, some are more readable than others, but on the whole, I'm a big fan of his. Yes, thank you.
Будь ласка, Маргарито, величко.
I think the lecture was really interesting and important, and it inspired me to read his books because I've been wanting this to do for a while. So my question is, how would Orwell view the way algorithms curate and what we see and read in a modern world? And is this a form of thought control he anticipated?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. I mean, by algorithms, you mean like in connection with reading?
Like news in like TikTok, Instagram, like it's some, we have information that is popular and everyone believes this information because it's popular and everywhere.
Well, as you know, there's really no going back. So I guess, you know, I'm almost 60 and probably I'm naive about AI, for example, that we can just ignore it. So I think it's also going to be the job to kind of try to find a balance with new technologies, because, you know, just to throw the baby out with the bathwater is probably not very responsible. So I think there has to be ways to, you know, teach young people to use these tools, to use social media but also develop critical thinking to not be so easily manipulated. Because as you know, it's so easy. It's so easy to waste time just scrolling on social media, and you've wasted half your day, and most of the stuff you've watched is just rubbish anyway. So yeah, I think that's a big challenge. And probably I don't have the answers to that, and probably he wouldn't either. But I think he wouldn't just be like saying, "Oh, turn off your phone." That's probably not realistic, right? So thank you. That's a good question. Food for thought.
Thank you.
You look
Да.
pretty cool there. You look like some Orwellian Big Brother with the earth behind you. Okay, next one.
Даша, будь ласка, потім
Yeah,
Софія.
thank you so much for presentation. I feel like this book will never lose its power because of the topics that were raised there. They're like always relevant. And I have a question. Maybe you think there is the scene in this book, like in the 1984, that has the strongest emotional impact on readers nowadays? Or maybe there is the scene that like touched you personally the most?
Yeah, I think the torture when he with the rats, that's a very powerful scene. And the other scene where, they're finally caught. Or there's also a scene at the beginning where they have the so-called hate week, this propaganda time where they're supposed to be manipulated to hate the enemy. And I think this again is something which unfortunately is alive and well, like people in Russia being, lied to and hating Ukrainians who even though many of them probably have family ties, but being brainwashed, and even with the help of the Orthodox Church in Russia. So I think this kind of propaganda and hate week is still very disturbing and powerful. Thank you.
Софія, будь ласка, потім Олександра.
Yeah, thank you very much for the lecture. For such important nowadays. And I have a question to you.
Yeah.
Do you think that all works of George Orwell we can consider as that one that encourage us to act, or it just they give us food for thought?
Yeah, I think all of his works have this humanist message. Some of course are more political than others, like the last two, 1994 and his essays and Animal Farm. But I think throughout them there's this kind of depiction of celebrating humanity, celebrating keeping your soul, if you want to use that word, whether that's in a war, whether that's in relationships, whether that's in the future, whether you're an animal. Okay, so I think definitely there's a vein of human celebrating our humanness which runs through them. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Дякую. Будь ласка, Олександру Казанцева.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you a lot for this insightful and really thought-provoking lecture, and I really appreciate how you connect Orwell's ideas to our modern issues. And I have a question about Ukraine. What do you think, in your opinion, how has the perception of Orwell in Ukraine changed since the beginning of the war in Ukraine?
Gosh, I don't feel qualified to talk about that. All I do know, mostly of what I do know is from my collaborator on our essay, and I can send you if you contact me when it's published. She's the first author, I'm just the second author, and she did a lot of research on how Orwell, like one of the colleagues said, how Orwell's become very popular nowadays. There's been some adaptations of Animal Farm in 1984. So definitely he seems to be important now. But I can't read in Ukrainian, so I'm not really qualified to comment on that. Does that make sense?
Дякую. Оксана, будь ласка.
Yes, hello. I
Oh.
also wanted to thank you for this lecture. I really enjoyed it. It was especially interesting to hear about his childhood and like youth. This quote-unquote backstory helped me to understand much better how to possibly try to read some of his work. And also, I really liked how you told us about that Orwell was critiqued for too pessimistic views. And for the question, I want to ask, was the fact that George Orwell spent his childhood and youth in this like English colonies in England decisive in the formation of his left-wing views in his like early stage of life?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Well, and he says so. So it's not just my view. That he, from an early age, became very suspicious of in his home country's motives in colonialism but he was always a democratic socialist, someone who believes, you know, as am I. So I'm still on the left politically, but I certainly don't believe in communism. But I don't like the extreme capitalism either. So some kind of middle way. And so I think if Orwell was alive today, you know, he might join the Ukrainian forces fighting Russia, as he did in Spain. And if he didn't fight, at least he would be writing about it, you know. And I think that's kind of our job, even those of us who aren't able to fight, or it's our job to fight intellectually, fight spiritually, not just for Ukraine, but for truth in general and freedom. Thank you.
Дякую. Дякую. Останнє запитання, Аліно, будь ласка.
Thank you for your lecture. I read this book during summer, and I think after your words, I understood this book better. So, do you think there is could be a future without totalitarianism in Livingstone's world, or is freedom completely lost?
Well, I hope no. Freedom is not completely lost, because right now we're communicating in different countries. But you know, again, kind of like what I said earlier, it's up to us, as Orwell says, to keep fighting. And it's easy to, especially in this day and age with technology, and when we have enough food and drink, it's easy to become passive and just think about ourselves, and really not fight for the higher values. So you know, obviously, you know, during the famine in the night, you know, people were just you know, it was easy to, not easy, but there was a clear problem. Okay, if people were starving to death, you know, something was wrong. But it's sometimes it's harder in this day and age. I heard one person say to me, "Oh, just let the war be over. I just want to have peace." But how long will the peace last, right? If Ukraine gives in now, right? So I don't think there's any simple answers, but it's easy to give in to just you know, I want just to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy my coffee and my but how long will that last? Okay, and what price do you pay? Thank you.
Девіде, дякую всій аудиторії. Девіде, насправді ми маємо ще близько 50 запитань. Ці запитання є в реєстраційній формі, це близько 70 запитань. Близько 50 запитань є ще в чаті. Також в чаті є чудові слова про вашу лекцію і про вас, як лектора. Будь ласка, Галино, скажіть ці слова.
Thank you for your answers, Professor David. And we have around 50 more questions in the chat. And we also have around 70 questions in the form, which people wrote while registering.
Yeah.
And also in this chat, we see lots of warm comments and comments with gratitude.
Що ми зробимо? Ми перенесемо наше обговорення вашої чудової лекції у віртуальний простір. Йдеться про YouTube-канал кафедри світової літератури, йдеться про Facebook-сторінку кафедри світової літератури, де усі ці запитання ви можете ще раз поставити лекторові, а лектор спробує на всі ці запитання відповісти. Звісно, що на деякі запитання вже прозвучали відповіді і під час лекції, і під час обговорення. Якщо іще хтось хоче сказати кілька слів рефлексії, будь ласка, вмикайте мікрофон. Якщо ні, то тоді до наступних зустрічей. Пан Девід Лівінгстон – це дивовижний лектор, ви побачили його і відчули його енергетику. Пане Девіде, до наступної зустрічі, до скорої зустрічі. Пані Галино, будь ласка.
Since we have so many questions, we suggest continuing our discussion online, and we invite you to our Facebook page and to our YouTube channel of our department, where our listeners can write their questions and our speaker will be able to see those questions and answer them. And for now, we are very thankful for your time and for this lecture, and we are saying goodbye to our audience and to the speaker.
Okay, or you could send me kind of all the comments, and then I could kind of see if there's some patterns and maybe write some response which you can share with people. Would that work?
Пані Юлія, ви почули пропозицію?
No.
Професор Девід запропонував, що ви надішлете йому всі запитання, а він подивиться самі.
Yes, I understand. Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes, David. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
So everyone, all the best.